So the last part, what do the ultramarathoners
eat during the event?
During the event.
That's where,
Okay.
that's where it is.
So there are two problems with answering the question. They vary quite a bit one from another. And the other is the guys who are winning the races, they may be practicing disinformation when they answer the question. Because do they want to give away their secret? So our understanding is that Tim Olson was using uncaffeinated gels during the race at 100 calories per hour. But I know of a couple people who've done half Ironmans, not competitive at the front of the pack, on 0 in-race calories, which is a really bold thing to do. But there's one guy in British Columbia who's my age, so late 60s, who has done the Victoria half Ironman in Victoria, British Columbia for 25 years. And at about year 23, he started this in his middle years of life. And about 23, he just found himself hating it. So he went, and his son had worked with Dr. Jay Wortman in British Columbia, who's a friend and colleague. And so he figured, well, what the heck? And so he went on low carb. And after 6 months, he went back to Victoria, and he had his last meal the afternoon, Friday afternoon. He drove down to the city early on Saturday morning, had 2 cups of coffee and did it, and came within 20 minutes of his all-time personal best. Because among other things, he'd shed about 15 kilos. But he had absolutely, his words, I had no fueling issues during the event. And so it may be, did Tim Olson need to have 100 calories every hour? Or was that just what his GI tract would tolerate, and his body didn't mind having that come in, but if he hadn't eaten it, he probably might have done the same time. So we are so ingrained. We have such a a psychological link to the carbs.
Addiction.
No, it's a psychological link. Addiction is it's biochemical, but we have this song, not our national anthem in the United States, called "America the Beautiful," and it's so beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain. It's part of our national identity that we have amber waves of grain. And probably in Mexico they talk about corn that they make tortillas out of. The Germans eat potatoes, and the Italians eat pasta, and the Asians eat rice. And then we joke that in America we eat everything. But cultures, the Japanese, rice is an intimate part of their culture. And telling people they don't have to eat it is, that's a difficult message to get across. And so for runners who've been told for decades that they have to eat carbs, they've just weaned themselves down to the level of carb intake where it no longer causes them major problems, and that's what they consume. We don't know exactly what people need, but the other point is each person has to experiment for himself or herself. But what Jeff found in his comparative study, Jeff Volek found with high carb versus low carb runners, for the low carb runners who had been adapted to less than 10% of calories for 6 months or longer, when he put them on a treadmill and ran them for 3 hours and measured fuel use, they were running at 70% of VO2 max with 90% of calories coming from fat. 10% of your calories can be made by your liver by gluconeogenesis from basically what are waste products. So that just with that one study, it basically says, you don't need to gulp carbohydrates anymore, because the body can live by, once you're adapted, you can sip carbs and do prodigious feats of activity. Here.
I just wanted you to comment on the pH of the body when you go low carb, when you take a lot of grains, the traditional diet, and what does that do to the activity or acidity of the body?
The question was, when you go on low carb, there's a lot of discussion on the internet and even before that, and when we were, in magazine articles and things like that about. Remember, I mentioned that at ketones of 3, that's nutritional ketosis. If you go up to 15 or 20, that's ketoacidosis. At very high ketone levels, the body becomes acidotic. Your pH goes low, and that really disrupts many functions of the body. And so the question is, in nutritional ketosis, do you become acidotic? Does the body pH drop down to a point where it causes risks or dangers? So I've measured that in my bicycle racers. When I did my original bike racer study, we had 5 bike racers. And they maintained, when they had ketones of 3 millimolar, and when they got up to 4 or 5 at the end of exercise, we found no disturbance of acid-base balance in those guys. But I can't say it happens in nobody. I have a small sample. And unfortunately, I don't think Jeff looked at that in his group and the reason why he didn't look at it, because we've never had evidence that it is a problem. But I can't say it's not a problem. It's just we've looked for it and we haven't found it. But our numbers of subjects in our groups are small necessarily, because these are expensive studies to do, and it's darn hard to convince somebody who has got a lot of money to fund something like this. So we're really bootleggers in our research. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying we've had to be creative, and we're limited in what we can look at. Yeah, Becky?
You mentioned the potential risk of magnesium in somebody with impaired renal function. What about the ketogenic diet more generally in somebody with impaired renal function?
So the question is, for somebody with impaired kidney function, what are the risks of being on a ketogenic diet? Well, there are very commonly voiced concerns among traditional nutritionists, well, let me say mainstream nutritionists and dietitians, that the, quote, high protein intake of the ketogenic diet is going to damage kidneys. But it's not a high protein diet, it's a moderate protein diet. And there is a group of cases published by Dr. Eric Westman, who was Jeff's and my co-author on the new Atkins book, and Dr. Mary Vernon in Kansas, where they had, Dr. Vernon in her practice had 50 patients who are diabetics with protein loss through the kidneys. And that's a sign of impending, basically, doom. If you have diabetes and you develop proteinuria, cynical doctors will say it's a few years before that person's going to be on dialysis. On a well-formulated ketogenic diet, meaning moderate protein, high fat, with a good balance of minerals, in the majority of cases, they reported that the proteinuria either got better or disappeared. Now, there is no medical treatment. ACE inhibitors slow down the progression of proteinuria. There is no medical treatment that anybody has that makes it go away. Now, why isn't this the standard of care? Because none of the people in the mainstream believe the data. Like it's this 10-year lag thing, It's the H. pylori, the guys in Perth proved they could save lives, save money by a new form of therapy, and it took 10 years before the world recognized that. So anyway, so moderate protein, making sure the mineral doses aren't excessive. If anything, this heals kidneys. It doesn't threaten them.
I'm wondering if there's a difference in the availability of omega-3 between flax seeds, flax meal, and flaxseed oil.
The human digestive tract, unless somebody has impaired gallbladder function or short bowel syndrome, the human digestive tract is extremely efficient at absorbing fat. But your question is flax seed, flax meal, and flax oil. Flax oil will be virtually 100% absorbed. The meal probably very high. The seed, unless it's ground, is likely to pass right on through. But I'm not a big fan of flax because there are 5 enzymatic steps that the body has to take from the 18-carbon precursor you get in flax to get to the final product that we put in our muscles and brain, which is called DHA. And people say, well, what about EPA, the other one in the fish oil? But that's, we humans actually convert most of the EPA that we take into DHA. So if you look at fish oil, it's half and half, and as I say, people oil is 95% or greater DHA. It's a very difficult process. So unless people have a a personal or religious reason not to eat fish, I'm an advocate of eating fish as a source of omega-3. But you know, again, that's a matter of choice.
I was just saying, my kidney function went off. Or actually, my actual kidney function was good. It was around about 70 GFR, but I did have proteinuria, and I have got not quite rid of it, but it has fallen from quite a bit from June to September. I cut it down from 5.6 grams in 24-hour urine test down to 559 milligrams, and now I do believe that I've got hardly anything there. But my EGFR went up to greater than 90. And,
So what we're getting is a testimonial from somebody who had major proteinuria, and you did this on a low-carb diet?
I've just gone ketogenic.
So on a ketogenic diet, somebody with a very high protein loss, a level that would be very threatening. And it's healed.
Well, yes. Well, as I said to you
so
earlier.
So far.
Yeah, so far. I mean, I don't say that it can be cured. And something I had an assault on my kidneys that caused it, but I knew it was there for 6 months, and I didn't do anything about it. But the thing is that it happened very suddenly, and then I cut out the wheat, which also lowered any inflammatory response. My bloods are all great. My cholesterol's fantastic.
So we don't know whether it was the wheat you cut out or whether all carbs or whatever.
I'm too
But
scared to eat.
I was going to say, if you've had the positive result you have, don't add either of them back.
My doctor actually said, don't add anything else. He said, just keep going on whatever you're doing. And right at the end, he said to me, what exactly do you eat? I said, a lot of fat, saturated fat.
So, yeah, when you have success, don't argue with it. Now, right here behind. Yeah.
Well, I've got two, but the first one is just there's a big push with the iron sugar in Australia with replacing sugar with rice malt syrup. Which
I'm sorry, replace the sugar?
With rice malt syrup, I think you call it brown
Rice malt syrup, okay.
Yeah, and it is very high carbohydrate, so 80%. I was just wondering if it still fits within, so like with anything with carbohydrates, if it still fits within your 50 grams or so, is it okay, or is it something that you should just be getting, I suppose, real food, and that's not really, I don't know how I'm trying to...
So the question is rice malt syrup okay as long as you stay within your personal tolerance? Because, again, not everybody needs to eat 50 grams. Some people need to eat less. My colleague and friend Jay Wortman in Canada, who's had type 2 diabetes, diagnosed in 2001, went on very low carb, put it in complete remission. He can't go over 30 grams. I know people who can stay in 70 grams. So there's no, 50 isn't the perfect, one for everybody. But your question is, how does rice malt syrup fit into that as an alternative to refined cane sugar? And my view is, as long as you're getting the benefits that you need, in my case, I monitor myself by measuring blood ketones. And as long as I keep my ketones in that 1 to 3 range, whatever I'm doing seems to be okay. So I grew up in New England in the United States where we make maple syrup. And I love this stuff. And I make maple walnut ice cream. And I put 3 tablespoons full of maple syrup, which is 80% by weight sugar, into my ice cream mixture for the flavor. And that makes 8 servings of ice cream. So I get 4 grams of sugar from the maple syrup per serving. And if I do that, and that's half of the ice cream I eat, because I make another version that doesn't have that sweetener in it, I tolerate it. So if you keep the dose unit, dose per serving low, and it provides flavor or pleasure to you, then use it. If you find the right line you have to walk on to meet your needs.
For people who have had their gallbladder removed, is there any particular issues with breaking down the fats, particularly having a high-fat diet?
So the question is, if you had your gallbladder removed, what are the potential issues? The gallbladder stores bile, and bile is needed to digest and absorb fats. And so you can't you basically, it's sort of like having an income with no savings account. You can't sort of save it up. And if you eat a big fat meal, let's say 50 grams of fat at one, or 80 grams of fat at one meal, it may be you overwhelm your digestive and absorptive capability, in which case you'll know in terms of GI symptoms. So the strategy would be to spread the fats out. And the other thing is it's much easier to absorb emulsified fats than oils, than liquid oils. And so using either homemade or commercial mayonnaise, or making dressings where you blend in emulsifying agents like cheese to make out like a cheese dressing, may give you better absorptive capability than if you just have, like some of my friends do, just put a lump of butter on top of a steak, where that's just liquid fat that has to be broken down and mixed into an emulsion before it can be absorbed. So it's basically trial and error. Sir, back.
The Japanese high carbohydrate diet with rice, is that explainable? And they do so well on a high carbohydrate? I've heard it postulated it's because sugar load is early as you can, it's not comparing apples with apples.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, how could a whole culture live predominantly on rice as their source of energy and be, thin and healthy? They have one of the longest lifespans in the world, and that's something that they figured out over. I think they got rice around 800 AD, so that would be 1,200 years ago, and realized that rice is a very slowly digested carbohydrate, unless you grind it to flour, because it's a complex structure. So it has a relatively low glycemic index, that is, that absorption is slowed over time, so it's kind of like a time-release carbohydrate. And realize also that up until about 1950, the majority of the fat and protein in the Japanese diet came from fish. So it was a high omega-3 intake. And that may be a factor combined with the rice that allowed them to find a kind of an island of safety at that end of the nutrient mix. But then look at what's happened to Japan in the last 60 years. And two things have happened. One is they have much, much higher prevalence of obesity than did before. And the other really fascinating thing is the average Japanese male has gained 6 times 2.5, 15 centimeters in height, adult height, between 1950 and current time. So something that, whether it's the fat that they've been given or it's the terrestrial proteins and the terrestrial fats, has stimulated growth, but in two directions, this way and that way. But I'm really not answering your question. It's a paradox, and we can't really answer it, but it's going to be very hard to go back to that, because A, the fisheries are failing, and B, people don't want to eat just rice and fish and pickled vegetables, which I enjoy on occasion, but and most of the Japanese are voting with their mouths by not continuing to eat that way anyway. So interesting paradox. I'm not sure how we turn it into practical treatment. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that. Isn't it true that in Japan there is rising rates of dementia and stroke? Like
Increase.
That those rates are starting to increase because of the fact that they've gone away from that more traditional diet where they had the high omega-3s and the fermented vegetables and with the rice, and they're adding all these other things, still eating the rice.
Mm-hmm.
That there's an increased levels of dementia and stroke.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe not heart disease, but other things.
Yeah. So there's been a very significant shift in the mortality cause in Japan. They're still one of the oldest developed societies in the developed world. But if you add a lot of sugar to your diet, which they have, I mean, we brought them Coca-Cola, we meaning Coca-Cola, Kentucky Fried Chicken, McDonald's, Burger King, a lot of refined, non-rice carbohydrates and sugar, but if they still eat the high salt, that could lead to things like increased blood pressure and stroke. So interesting lessons, but it's hard, it's hard to translate that into practical therapy. There was, of course, something called the Kempner rice diet back in the 1930s when we didn't have medication to treat hypertension. And at Duke University in North Carolina, this guy developed a diet. It was basically just rice and fruit. And people with severe high blood pressure came there and they were put on a diet of just rice and fruit. By the way, the rice was cooked with no salt in it. So it was salt-free rice and fruit. And they had a house where they basically locked the people up and kept them on this. And you could drop their blood pressure on that diet.
They also lost lots of weight.
Hmm?
They also lost a lot of weight.
Yes.
They used it for obesity.
They used it for obesity, but it was primarily initially developed for hypertension, and then they noticed that people losing a lot of weight. And the question was, why did they lose weight? And it appears that because cooked rice is a relatively high volume, low energy density food, that people just chose not to eat enough of it to meet their energy needs.
Wouldn't not the fructose have done damage anyway?
With fructose? Well, the fruit was, it was most of the calories came from rice. So it really wasn't that high fructose. I mean, if you compare that to a liter of soda with high fructose corn sweetener in it, the fruit's a far better choice. But again, it was an empiric observation. There was no clear scientific explanation, except it was very, very low in salt. And that's why they used that, because they knew salt was, at least in some people, linked to hypertension.
I read in your book that younger people should get more carnitine. What's sort of a more natural way of getting more carnitine?
So the question of carnitine, my colleague Dr. Volek has done a lot of research with carnitine, and I would like to defer that question to him, except he's not here. Basically, animal flesh meat contains a fair bit of carnitine, and that's used in the body for transporting fats into cells or into mitochondria. We can synthesize it ourselves, but if you eat it from animal sources, that makes the concentration greater than what we make ourselves. And he's used supplements to do that in his research, but I'm not in a position to say whether one should use supplements. But one of the advantages of being an omnivore, of not being a vegetarian, is you have higher carnitine concentrations and better transport of fats into the mitochondria where they're oxidized. But wish I could tell you more. I can give you Jeff's email address. Other questions? Yeah, back to you.
I just wanted to make a comment following up over here about Japanese in the road. I'm sure you must be aware that there's a movement, a way of eating that's directly in opposition to yours, the low fat, high carb, where the fats come solely from plant food. Whole food plant-based diet.
Correct.
All the fat comes simply from fruit and vegetables. All the protein comes simply from fruit and vegetables. And so it's a high carb, low fat diet.
Plant-based.
And
then one of the advocates of that is Dean Ornish. Yeah. One of the advocates of that is Dean Ornish. Esselstyn and T. Colin Campbell in the China study.
What do you want to say anything about that as a way of eating in distinction to yours?
When Jeff and I guess can I borrow somebody's copy of Low Carb Living, the one with salad in the front? So on page 107, I'm wrong, 111, okay. So we looked at what happens when you take people from a very high carb, very low fat diet, like an Ornish type diet. This is 15% of calories is fat. He'd say, oh, get down to 10. And we move them down the scale of carbs, and which means up the scale in fat. You can see that there's a fatty acid here. That a particular fat, monounsaturated fat with 16 carbons called palmitoleic acid. There'll be a test later, and you have to get the spelling right. As you reduce carbs and increase fats, this stuff drops down uniformly. Pretty much everybody. So you see high here, down here. But notice at this end, there's a big variation. The variation from top to bottom is this wide. The variation from top to bottom down here is that wide. So little variation between people here, big variation here. This is a biomarker of converting carbohydrate to fat. If you're eating carbohydrate and you're making it into fat, it defeats the purpose of being on a low-fat diet. Except if you have to come up here with a magnifying glass and squint, but there are 2 lines here across here that are absolutely flat out of 28 people. Those 2 people are completely resistant to turning carbs into fat, no matter how much carbs we feed them. I would contend that those 2 people would do great on the Ornish diet. No, really. Those are people who are highly suited. I hope I didn't bend your spine too much there. Those are people who are highly suited to eating a high-carb diet. Now, Ornish, Dean Ornish, who I've debated, and it was collegial, except he said, but Steve's all wrong. But it was collegial debate. And he will get up and give you case history after case history of people who were highly benefited by and potentially uniquely benefited by his diet. And I think he's right for those individuals. But what he's never told us, that's his numerator. 100 people who say he saved their lives. Maybe 200 people who say he saved his lives. But how many tens of thousands of people went on that diet in order to find those? So that's the numerator. Say it's 250. Maybe say it's 1,000. But how many 100,000 copies of his book has been sold? How many people have tried it? And so what's the denominator? So I doubt that there is a numerator, but just by chance, we happen to find 2 out of 28 who are clearly resistant to the negative effects of eating a high carbohydrate diet. So it may be that it's really good for 10, 20, 30% of the population. And in the introduction to the book, we say, this diet is not for everybody. But for people who are insulin resistant, this is the diet of choice. And so there was a study done at Stanford by a guy named Dr. Chris Gardner, published in the Journal of American Medical Association in 2007. It was called the A to Z study. And Chris Gardner, by the way, he's a vegan vegetarian. Okay? His personal commitment is to eat a diet with no animal products whatsoever. And so he did a study comparing, the A was for Atkins, he did the Ornish diet, he did the lean, Kelly Brownell's lean, Learn manual, and then the Zone diet. So 4 different diets. He recruited close to, I think it was 350 women and randomized them to any one of those 4. And the weight loss, everybody lost weight. I mean, all the groups lost weight on average. The Atkins people lost the most weight at 6 months and started gaining at the end of a year. All the other groups lost less weight and started gaining at the end of the year. But what Chris Gardner did, and he published that, but then he went back and said, let me look at insulin sensitivity versus insulin resistant. And let me take the 2 extremes. And so his 2 extremes were Ornish on this end, very low fat, and Atkins on this side, high fat, low carb. And he divided each group into 3 subgroups: insulin sensitive, intermediate, and insulin resistant. Insulin sensitive, insulin resistant, or intermediate and resistant. And then he took the sensitive and resistant. Okay, on the Ornish side, the insulin sensitive people lost weight very well. The insulin resistant people lost no weight, literally lost no weight. On the Atkins side, it didn't matter whether you were resistant or sensitive, you lost weight. What that says is if you're an insulin sensitive overweight person, you'll do fine on Ornish. But if you're an insulin-resistant person, it's not going to work for you. Dean Ornish was incensed. He was incensed. Can I be vulgar? He was pissed off. And he's attacked this guy, Chris Gardner, whose personal lifestyle is very close to his own. Because Chris presented the data as he saw it. And it became very controversial. But a year and a half ago, Chris was awarded $8 million in private money, not federal money, to follow up on that study. And there is a study now being done in 300 people comparing just the Ornish versus the Atkins. And this time, because Ornish said, you didn't spend enough time with them teaching them all the details of our program. Because it includes meditation, it includes relaxation techniques, once people have lost weight, it includes exercise. And he's right. But what he didn't count on was Chris said, okay, but we're going to put the same amount of energy into the low carb approach. And Dr. Gardner has seen a copy of this book. And he knows that we think it's much more complex than just simply telling people not to eat the carbs. And so it's a 1 year for each subject, 300 people in each group. And we hope, and I have no part of it, by the way. And I'm staying away from Chris because I don't want to pollute. I don't want there to be any sign of collusion because we're not close friends, but we're pretty good friends. So time will tell. But I have confidence that Chris Gardner is a honest broker of what he sees. And he's very curious to see how this comes out, and time will tell.
Videos of his early studies are up on YouTube if anybody wants to watch them. They're really pretty great.
Yeah.
Can I ask why the people on a low carb diet, they lost more weight at the beginning, and then their weight towards the end of the year or later started going up? Why did it start going up?
Actually, I love that question. It's why did the people on the low carb come down in 6 months, and by the year they were heading back up? They gave the people the copy of the previous Atkins book, not our Atkins version, the one before, because they did this in 2007. Ours was published in 2010. And I think they had either, I can't remember, it was 5 or 7 instruction sessions, group sessions with the people to tell them how to do it. But those sessions ended, I think, after 3 months. And then they followed them for a year. And to tell people, don't eat carbs, and eat the right kinds of fats, and then assume that they will do it against everything they're being told by their doctors, their dietitians, their friends, their neighbors, strangers on the street, in the grocery store saying, you don't want to buy that, that's dangerous. So it takes much more support and guidance than that amount to make this lifestyle last.
Okay, so they need meditation and support groups too.
Mindfulness in how one eats is very, very important. And these are not things that you just casually tell people, just go do it. And so the trite little soundbite I use is if reversing diabetes was easy, everybody would be doing it. We have a tool now that has a potential to reverse and hold in remission diabetes, but it's going to be complex, and it's going to take us time to figure out how to do it, efficiently and economically. But we're on the track of doing that, and I have to live long enough to see it happen. But you had a question.
The fact that the carbs made them in the end because they weakened or lapsed, went up towards the end of the year, is just more evidence why the carbs diet is actually contrary to weight loss and health.
Yeah, so they got down to about 15% carbs. They never got down to 5%.
Yeah.
And based on their food records. And at the end of the year, they were back up to 30% of carbs. So it was I'd kind of make the analogy, I live in California, my family likes to vacation in Hawaii. But if we weren't sure we wanted to go all the way there, we might try going 3/4 of the way there and see what that was like. You know, deep water landings, long swims, not good protection. And so if we think of the nutritional ketosis as an island of biochemical safety, feed the brain, get the anti-inflammatory effects, you pretty much got to get people there and help them figure out, guide them to how to get there and land safely there if we're going to make this last long term. And we're getting close. Someone here?
So, just picked up on that note of how do they keep it going, and I think that one of the things I'm finding, and I'd like your opinion on how to best approach this, is that when, I don't know if it's an addiction, but when people are trying to break an addiction, some of the things they do are they get themselves away from other people who have that addiction, they get themselves away from the thing they're addicted to, that helps them get to a place where they can avoid it.
Yep.
Not so easy in the society we're living, but also not so easy when the rest of the family doesn't buy into it, disbelieves it, and actively feels that you are possibly being a bit over exuberant and evangelical about what you're saying. Even though when you start looking at the literature, you start thinking, am I doing the right thing as a parent, feeding my child as much stuff as they end up getting, the amount of sugar, bread, potatoes, rice. They burn a lot more energy for their body weight, obviously, so that's how they actually deal with a lot of it. But how do I teach them along the way without seeming to be some nutter who's going to really diet? And it's very difficult to find that balance and find the arguments that people who are completely unaware of the situation to explain to them what you're trying to achieve with your own health, and then hopefully your family's health as well.
Mm-hmm.
So any tips and tricks for helping your family move along that way as well without them feeling like they're being pushed down a working path? Great.
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
And my dodge is, I'm an internist. And we internists, you never want an internist to treat a kid. Because they're different. Couple aspects. One is the strongest support groups for low carbohydrate diets in children are found in the use of ketogenic diets for pediatric seizures. Mm-hmm. And there's a group called the Charlie Foundation, which was started by a Hollywood movie producer whose child went through agonizing treatment, including brain surgery to try to relieve his seizure disorder, failed on a whole bunch of drugs with lots of side effects in the process. And then someone finally bothered to mention, oh yeah, there's this ketogenic diet they used to use back in the 1930s, and you might try that. And as soon as they put their son Charlie on this diet, seizures stopped. And so they started this foundation. Meryl Streep is a spokesperson for it because he was the producer for some of her movies. And they have a very good website, and they can give you some guidance. I personally chose, while doing this research, up through the last, until about 4 or 5 years ago, that I was a stay-at-home dad for the last 10 years after I became a recovering academic. And I cooked for my family, and I gave them a very low sugar but not ketogenic diet. And they tolerated me for most of that time, and to some degree now have some begrudging appreciation. Now that my son's 19 and my daughter's 20 and they're both away in school, and they're realizing, hey, we ate pretty well at home compared to the junk they feed us in the cafeteria at the university.
Yeah.
But I think you are eager to help answer the question.
I was just going to say that our son is quite slim, muscular. We would say, you have to eat breakfast. I don't want to eat breakfast. You have to have fruit. Why do I have to have fruit? I'd rather have vegetables. We were just telling him what to do because we thought we were right. Mm-hmm. And I was giving him skim milk and all of that. And now I'm saying to him, it's okay, you can have full fat. And if you don't want fruit, that's fine. You can have your vegetables and butter's better. Yeah. Eat when you're hungry. He was naturally telling us, what he naturally wanted.
Sure.
And we were trying to change that and ruin it.
Sure. And what my kids told me is that, my wife is Asian, and in her culture, traditionally, you'll have rice porridge for breakfast. And if I gave them just rice porridge, they didn't want it. And we finally figured out they were bonking at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's easily absorbed, the insulin goes high and then it drops down, and 10 o'clock they're having this big sag. And so if we gave them that and something fried along with it, that gave them kind of a, kids are very honest. They just can't tell you in words what's happening to them. I have, I won't say egg on my face because I think that's good for breakfast, but I learned from that experience just from my own kids.
Yeah.
Do you have some of the stories about elderly people? Like I've got parents who are they're quite aged, and there's memory loss and cardiovascular disease and there's type 2 diabetes, but they're trying to get them to change their habits so hard. Do you have any stories that you can tell us about that?
The question is changing the behaviors of the elderly who might benefit for many reasons from a low-carb diet. And that's very, very hard because, as you say, the behaviors are so ingrained that it's I won't. You asked if I have stories. I won't share with you my failure of being able to influence my own parents' behavior. But it is tough. And by the way, there is a lot of research being done now with low-carb ketogenic diets trying to arrest or reverse Alzheimer's. But you pretty much have to have the person institutionalized to be able to do that research. And a major area of research now is rather than putting them on a ketogenic diet, they're actually making ketones as nutrients to feed people as if they were medication.
The MCT oil.
Well, no, this is actually ketone esters. So beta-hydroxybutyrate or acetoacetate esters. The problem is you have to eat a lot of them to get the blood levels. And we get, I naturally make 100 grams a day in my liver, but if I eat 100 grams of ketones, the taste of it alone would be terrible. Was there something in the very top?
No, I was just saying my sister works in the elderly home, and I said to her, you've got to show the nurses and the people that look after them these films. And she said to me, Trudy, they make money. It's not going to make money, so they're not going to put it in there. And she said the people we get in, they've got dementia and they've got Alzheimer's, the worse they are, the more money we get, and they're the ones we take. And it's so sad because she tries to make a difference, and if they get more money, the worse they are.
I mean, it's easy to be cynical, and I say that in the United States we don't have a healthcare system, we have a disease care system. And when here and then there and here.
Keep talking about like the Atkins diet, Bush diet, this diet, that diet. When you started researching LCHF, did you look at it as being a diet, or has it always been a lifestyle for you?
Lifestyle.
No.
But that sounds kind of so most people think in terms of diet.
Yeah, that's right. So when you started, were you looking at it as could this be a diet? You thought, no, this is something I want to research. I think this.
When I look at, my teachers of this are Aboriginal cultures, and for them it wasn't a diet. It was how they lived.
I was just going to ask about the levels of ketones. What would you expect as you adapt to keto adapted to your lifestyle? Your ketones drop in the morning, they're low in the morning, and they accelerate through the day. Is that what, roughly? If you're on a well-formulated diet and everything's going well, do they stay at the same level throughout the day, or it's all up and down?
That's an excellent question, and Rod indirectly tried to answer that by suggesting that you measure in the afternoon.
Yeah.
People vary a lot one from another, but ketones are not. You don't have on any one diet. You don't have one perfect stable level. There's variation across the day, and for many people they're low in the morning, and that may be because we have a diurnal variation in cortisol, and cortisol it's a stress hormone, tends to suppress ketone production. And cortisol is highest in the morning and then tapers off during the day. And physical activity raises ketones. And then if you eat sources of fat that contain medium chain triglycerides, which include butter, chicken butter and coconut oil, that will tend to raise them up. So we generally, and then the other issue is we're now learning that it's not just fuel, it's also a signaling hormone that changes gene expression. And once you change the expression of those genes, it probably carries over for many hours, if not half a day or a day, once you push that button. So it's looking to us at this point, and again, this is half art and half science at this point. I'd like it to be all science, but it's looking like if you get your level between 1 and 3 sometime during the day, you're going to get the benefit. So if people are going to pay money for these strips that cost 75 cents or $1 a piece to do the ketone blood strips, if you're going to do it once a day, do it in the late afternoon.
I've actually done it 3 to 4 times a day, just
Okay.
to monitor and check it out. see
And
what's
your
going on.
experience?
It's interesting.
Okay.
I thought I was into a ketogenic diet. I've been low carb for about going on 5 months now. Low carb like that. And currently, in the last week, I've actually done a Tim Noakes' course online as well, so I'm getting more information there. I've dropped the amount of food I'm eating, lowered the protein, higher the fat, just jiggling it all out. And I yesterday hit 1.1 millimolar twice during the day. But my breath analysis, because I'm doing that as well, didn't reflect that. So that was actually contradictory to the blood, which is.
So the breath analysis said you didn't have much Low ketone?
Yeah. So I
it's
think
interesting because when I do breath on the finger stick, it works. They're pretty concordant for me.
Yeah.
But my 20-year-old daughter, who did a 6-week experiment on herself this last late summer and fall, found that they're disconnected. And we're using the same meter in the same batch of strips.
Yeah.
You know, in our kitchen and on our dining room table for breakfast and before dinner.
Yeah.
And so for me, the two matched nicely. For her, they didn't. So don't feel alone. We still have a lot to learn how to do this. So we're down to the last 2 minutes. Let me take this question down, that one there, and then we'll.
I just wanted to ask about like daily, meal variety, like throughout your week, or whatever. Like your opinion on variety. Does the body need variety, or?
The question is, do we need variety? I know some people who eat exactly the same thing, like every other day. They have just 2 daily patterns. And that's easy for them. Shopping is easy. It's Tuesday, I'm going to have eggs for breakfast. It's Wednesday, I'm going to have sausage for breakfast. If you have eggs for breakfast, you have a salad for lunch, and you have pork chops for dinner, kind of thing. And for them, it's just very easy. Other people don't want to eat the same thing more than once a week. So I'm a variety person, but I'm a foodie. I like to think about food and trying new recipes. Recently, my wife came home. She'd torn a page out of a magazine. It was grilled Caesar salad. You take romaine lettuce, you cut the thing lengthwise, and you put it. You paint the Caesar dressing on the cut side, and put it the non-cut side down on the grill for about 3 minutes on a hot grill. And then you flip it over for just 30 seconds while you paint a little bit of the Caesar dressing on the seared side. The other side warms up, and then you eat it, and it's kind of soft on the outside, crunchy on the inside, and it's wonderful. And we hadn't eaten that. We started that in July. I hadn't eaten it ever before in my life, and now it's kind of a staple, and I do it a couple times. But I'm going to get tired of it all. So, variety for some people, but the point is, if there's comfort for a person in knowing precisely what they're going to eat, and they don't have to worry about shopping for special stuff like anchovies to make this dressing and so on. It's your choice. There's one other.
Yeah. With the slide that you had up earlier with the protein, it was 1.5 grams to 2 per your reference body weight.
Right.
I've been tracking the last 2 days, and I know I've not actually hit that. I'm just wondering what the minimum would be to just maintain your body functions, like the minimum amount of protein that you need.
So the question is, what's the minimum? The August committee of my government, that my government pulls together every 5 years, says 0.8 grams per kilo is the right dose. But we know that people vary one from another, and I want to provide enough that the one side of the curve, one subgroup doesn't get left behind. But if 0.8 to 1 works for you, and your strength and function seem to be maintained, then that's possible. But I'm trying to ensure that the amount we recommend allows people to be in ketosis and still covers at least the needs of at least 95% of the people who try it. I don't want to let 1/3 of the people kind of fall off the end. So again, there's a lot of empiricism. You have to find out what works for you because there's such variety among us as human beings. And
just one
she was really eager. Then I'll take the rest. I'll take a few questions up front before I fall asleep.
It's a little bit light-hearted, but if you've got yourself into ketosis and along comes a wedding or Christmas or something like that, and you just break out of it and you drink champagne and you eat all sorts of other things you wouldn't normally eat, then what happens to your system? Can you go back? Will it revert to ketosis the next day, or does it take another 3 weeks to
readapt? So the question is, if you stumble upon a joyous event like a wedding and you partake, so if you have a lapse, what do you do? And if it's one event and the next day you get back on the straight and narrow, it might be you'll have some symptoms for a couple of days. And then everything, you'll be back in the group. What are the symptoms? If you eat, you have, you start out by saying, have a couple of glasses of champagne. After that, you don't remember what you're. But if you eat 200 grams of carbohydrate, which would be 800 calories, and you turn every ounce of that to fat, that would be something on the order of less than a quarter pound. But people who are keto adapted and eat 200 calories of carbohydrates in one sitting, the next morning they get up and stand on the scale. Typically, they gain somewhere between 4 and 8 pounds. Now, is that some magical conversion of the body sucks up energy and turns into fat overnight? No, that's because, remember I said that when you're in a ketogenic diet, the kidneys speed up their salt excretion. But when you suddenly reverse it, salt excretion is essentially just shut off. And all the salt and water that you consume after that, during that meal and after, is retained. And so my bike racers, these are lean, healthy guys. We had them on a ketogenic diet for a month, locked up in the metabolic ward. And so once they finished the study, I took them out. I didn't want them to really overdo it, but I took them out and let them have any meal. I bought them any meal they wanted in any restaurant they wanted in the city of Boston, Massachusetts. And I saw guys eat like, an 18-inch thick crust pizza. They'd start the south end and go right through the north side without coming up for air, just boom. The average guy gained 6 pounds. These are guys. These are not women who tend to bloat. These are guys who gained 6 pounds the next morning because of fluid retention. Within 2 or 3 days, they were eating high carbs and resolved because they stayed on high carb. But if you go back on low carb, you will get rid of it within 2 days. But that's a lapse. If you do it multiple times, we call that relapse. And it gets harder and harder each time. And I don't know if that's biochemical or behavior. But if you have multiple relapses, that leads to the ultimate, which we call collapse. And when people have been off the diet for more than a month, they've got something about either behavior or biochemistry is telling them this isn't working well. And for them, typically it takes a year before they can get back on. But we've had people who've done really well, had great weight loss, improvement in health, and somewhere 6 months, 9 months, a year, collapse occurs, and they're beating themselves up saying, I'm getting back on this. And very often, they'll eventually, knowing that how well they felt and how well they functioned, a year later, or a year, 2 years later, they get back on it, and this time they make it stick because they know the stakes are much higher if they're playing at the margins of their dietary tolerance. And this is not something that you just do and stick right perfectly the first time all the time. But it's something that is when people find what works for them and realizes what they need, the resources they need to make it work for them, it becomes something that, whether it's the first year, the second year, the third year, but we've had people who've come back to it and stuck with it and had tremendous benefit. eventually. So the point is, I'm not saying experiment with it, but I'm saying don't be discouraged if the first time around it doesn't, end up being permanent, because there's always a second chance.
Great.
And thank you much, and I'll be upfront.